Welcome to episode 51 of the Growing Space podcast. In today's episode, I am going to be sharing with you some tips, recommendations, food for thought, if you will, for how to transition your summer growing space into your fall growing space. So this time of year is full of change. There's newness right around the corner with a new season. And there are new things that we can be growing in our growing spaces should we decide to invite them in. We're also going to talk a little bit about crop rotation. I know that this is a topic that is of interest to some of you listening, and so I do have some time planned in this episode to speak to crop rotation and understanding what plants are good to plant after other plants. It might be a little short, little sweet content for you today, but super helpful nonetheless. So let's go ahead and get started.
Welcome to the Growing Space podcast. I'm your host, Farmer Erin, owner of the Patio Farmer, and I believe that no matter what size space you have, you can grow food at home. Tune in every Tuesday as I share my best tips, tricks, and encouragement for tending to homegrown edible plants. I'm here to support your food growing journey. The Growing Space podcast is sponsored by Plant Club by the Patio Farmer. Plant Club by the Patio Farmer is a monthly subscription service I started in 2020. It's a membership-based opportunity to take your growing journey to the next level. With 4 different membership options, you get to decide the amount and kind of support that's right for you. All Plant Club members receive access to my online community through a platform called Circle. Having access to this platform allows members to share pictures, ask questions, celebrate harvest, and get to know each other. All Plant Club members also have access to free seeds each month, along with information on how to plant and tend to their crops, with seeding instructions and downloadable resources from the Patio Farmer's Resource Library. Membership starts at just $14 a month. Join Plant Club today by visiting my website, thepatiofarmer.com/membership.
I'm going to start off today by giving you my fall transition spiel. I've been talking to a lot of my clients about this for the last couple weeks as we are planning for this new season, the fall season ahead. The fall growing season is one of my favorites, if not my most favorite time of year to be growing food for several reasons. First of all, if you live in a more temperate climate like I do, so I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we are zone 8A. I'll put a link in the show notes if you're like, what is she talking about? What is a zone? What does 8A mean? I'll put a link in the show notes and you can learn more about what zone you live in and all that good stuff. But we live in zone 8A, which means we don't get super cold winters. We have a few weeks here and there throughout the winter season that can get really cold, but for the most part, we have fairly mild winters, and our fall crops are things that will continue growing, continue producing for us all through the fall season and even through winter. Y'all, I have in the past grown collard greens from September until March. Amazing. So good. So it's great to have that year-round food production, and that really comes in the fall, or that comes from planting a fall round of vegetables. You're really able to lean in and maximize that year-round food production in your growing space. Another great thing about growing in the fall is, as opposed to the spring where we're working from cooler temperatures to warmer temperatures, and then the summer when it's just super warm, hot, humid, and life is abundant. In the fall, we're working from those warm, hot, humid temperatures to cooler temperatures. The impact there, right, is that whereas in the spring, you're working from a period of dormancy to a period of life, it's the opposite in the fall. So you're working from a period of abundance and warmth and lots of living things such as bugs. I'm speaking about bugs and pests here. But you're working from a period of activity where you have lots of bugs, lots of things alive and thriving towards a period of dormancy in the winter. So you tend to have less pest issues in the fall. Your plants can be healthier in the fall than they are in the spring. Another great reason to grow food in the fall is that you don't have another season, another planting season nipping at your heels. So you have, if you plant in September, then you have basically 2 full seasons before you need to think about freeing up that space again. And this can be really helpful, especially if you like growing some of your fall leafy greens that take a little extra time to grow, like your broccoli, your cauliflower, your cabbage. I love growing these in the fall because they can just take their time, as much time as they need. They've got like the next 6 months to just do their thing. Whereas in the spring, if you're planting in mid-February, you want to have that space open by mid-May to get your summer stuff in. So it's a little bit of a different mindset when you're planning, and you can really just embrace a longer period of time to allow some of those leafy greens time to mature. Anytime we have a change in the season, right, we are offered a new opportunity to grow or a new opportunity to rest. You don't have to always have something growing in your growing space. It could be resting, it could be rebuilding, you could be taking a breather, you could be resting yourself, right? So in the fall, you have the option. It's not it's never required, but you have the option to grow fall vegetables. If you take that option, then it's a fresh start. I feel like the summer season, it's just like this maddening rush of productivity. With that productivity comes a little bit of stress, lots and lots of work. Growing food at home, it's a labor of love. And, if you're like me, then usually by the end of August, by the time Labor Day rolls around, I am just craving the need for a reset. I'm craving the coolness. I'm craving a little break. I'm craving newness. And our fall season really affords us the ability to clear out all of the stuff that's been stressful, that's been giving us grief, harvest all of the delicious things that we have been enjoying, get those final picks of peppers and eggplant and tomatoes and okra and basil, put up a bunch of stuff and clear out our growing spaces. Give ourselves a clean slate to then fill in with a fresh round of veggies. So those are all of the reasons why I love growing food in the fall. And you might be asking, okay, well, what are the different crops that you can grow in zone 8A? So I'm speaking specifically about my zone. So in the fall, we can grow our leafy greens. So broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, collard greens, chard, spinach, lettuce, arugula, bok choy, different Asian greens, kohlrabi. We can also be planting our root vegetables, so carrots, beets, radish, parsnip, turnip, rutabaga, and our bulb vegetables, so our onions, our garlic, our green onions, shallots, all of those delicious things, plus any herbs except for basil. You can also plant fennel in the fall. There's so many delicious things. I will share some previous episodes. Last week I finished a year-long mini-series that I've been doing called Meet the Plant Families. So I'll list the cool weather plant families for you in today's show notes. And if you want to give those a listen, feel free to do a little binge listening, if you will. So those are your fall crops. Now, as we talk about the fall transition, everyone's going to be a little bit different here. We all have different timings in our spaces. We all have our favorite types of crops or things that we're really excited to grow and harvest from. So the fall transition can be it's a little bit of a balancing act, right? So your summer vegetables, your things like tomatoes and cucumbers and squash and plant peppers, okra, those plants will continue to grow for you and produce for you as long as they stay healthy through the first frost. So it's important that you understand when your first frost is. This is slightly different or drastically different based off of our geography. I'll put a link in today's show notes where you can look up when your first average frost date is. And just because it's an average, it doesn't mean that it's set in stone. There's a 30% chance, generally speaking, or a 30% probability that you could get frost before your first average frost date. But your summer vegetables, the things that you have growing now, will continue to grow and produce for you up until that frost date. They do not tolerate frosts and freezes. And so for me, where I am located, our first average frost date is usually like early November, right? So that's great. Like if you want your summer vegetables to continue, if you want to be harvesting tomatoes through Halloween, by all means, that's an option, as long as your plants are still healthy and thriving. I feel like that's also something that we always are balancing. Usually come end of August, early September, we're starting to pull plants, or our plants are kind of checking out for the season and reducing their production. If they're not, heavily affected by a pest or disease issue this time of year, they'll keep chugging. Now, here's the balance, because what happens also in the fall, our days get shorter, which means there's less sun exposure. And sun is super important for our plants, especially our little baby plants that are just freshly seeded or freshly planted and trying to get established. So the earlier we plant our fall vegetables, the better. So what does that mean? So the earliest that I would start planting fall vegetables is mid-August, okay? The latest, and this is specific for my zone, this timing is going to be different for you depending on where you live, but for where I am, like Piedmont of North Carolina and South Carolina, I would be starting to plant for fall mid-August. And then I will try to have just about everything planted except for garlic. If you want to grow garlic, give the Allium plant family episode or the Amaryllidaceae plant family episode a listen. I go all into the details about growing garlic, but garlic is planted at the end of October. It's kind of a weirdo. It's all by itself, the end of October. But I try to have all of my fall vegetables, except for garlic, planted before the first week in October is done. So you have about 6 weeks, a 6-week window to plant your fall vegetables. And like I said, the earlier you can be within that window, the better. So think like Labor Day. That would be a great time to transition from your summer vegetables to your fall vegetables. So that often means that you have to say goodbye to your summer vegetables, maybe a little ahead of schedule. So as that feels right to you, you can certainly leave certain summer plants that you're really loving and they're being super productive for you. You can certainly leave them to continue to produce. Just know that wherever you leave summer vegetables, you're not going to have a whole lot of options for planting in that space later in the season. And it really is just about sunlight. The weather could still be nice and warm and temperate and not stressful, but the sunlight, as we start to lose sunlight, as we get closer and closer to the end of the year, to the winter solstice, that is what impacts the success of your fall veggies. So those are the big things to keep in mind with the fall transition. We just passed Labor Day weekend. So we're already into September. It's still officially summertime. Crazy, I know. But it's still officially summer for another 2 weeks. So now would be a great time for you to start pulling some of your summer vegetables, making room for your fall vegetables, making your list of what all you want to grow this fall, and then starting to get those plants and getting them planted, buying your seeds. I love using seeds for any root vegetable. And lots of leafy greens. I also like to start from seed, like lettuce and arugula and spinach. But getting plants for those bigger leafy greens like kale, broccoli, cauliflower is definitely my recommendation this time of year. So spending the rest of this month pulling those summer plants that you're ready to say goodbye to, reinvigorating your soil with some fresh compost, maybe topping off your space with some fresh soil, and getting those new plants planted. That is your goal. That's your homework assignment if you want to. And if you're kind of thinking to yourself, oh, I'd just like for these summer plants to produce and kind of peter out, and then I'll take a break for the winter, then that's great too. I do have an episode that I'm going to remind you. I'm going to put a little reminder for an episode that I recorded almost a year ago. I've been podcasting for almost a year. Crazy. Next week, it'll be officially a year. Episode 52. But last fall, I recorded an episode called Fall Tasks for the Weary Summer Grower. And I'll put that episode information in the show notes today. And if that's kind of speaking to you more, maybe you're like, I just want to take a break. I need a breather. I don't really want to think about another round of plants right now. That's fair. Give that episode a listen because there are still some things that you can be doing that are a little bit more passive, yet super productive for your growing space. So switching gears just for a few moments here at the end of the episode, and I want to spend some time talking about crop rotation. So this has been a topic that comes up pretty frequently when I'm talking with clients. This has also come up as a requested topic for a podcast episode. So I wanted to just kind of piggyback this content along with the fall transition content for today. Crop rotation in its essence is identifying crops that work together in the soil in a specific pattern and rotating those crops in a specific location for an intended purpose. Conventional farmers tend to have a rotation in their fields. I don't know if you've noticed this before, but I come from farm country, and every time I go see my family in central Ohio, there's conversation about the crop rotation because even within monoculture farming, so that would be where you have acres and acres of just one crop planted, there is crop rotation. And the crop rotation that these conventional farmers practice is with corn and soybeans. Sometimes they'll swap wheat for corn, but it's usually some kind of heavy feeding grass, like corn. Corn is a grass. Wheat is a grass. And then a legume. So some type of bean, typically soybeans. So these are the two cash crops in central Ohio and in many other places in the United States that practice crop rotation, where these farmers practice crop rotation. And the reason why they practice crop rotation is to bring a little balance, to bring a little stability to their soil composition, their soil nutrients, etc. Now, a lot of these conventional grain farmers are also doing things like fertilizing fairly heavily, as well as, applying herbicides, pesticides to their fields in order to maximize their yields and thus their profits. Farming, even at a large scale, still has fairly slim margins. So as much as these farmers can do to maximize and optimize their yields, that's what they're after. So the crop rotation in terms of conventional agriculture is first planting a legume. If you listen to the episode that I did, part of the Meet the Plant Families miniseries where I talked about the Fabaceae plant family, that's the legume family, the peas, the beans. I've mentioned this in several other episodes as well. But as legumes are growing in the soil, they create nitrogen. And nitrogen is really important for for all of our plants, really, but especially the plants that we eat the leaves and stems of. So by planting soybeans in a field, those beans, one, they're producing a great cash crop for these farmers, but then they are also building nitrogen in the soil. So then once the beans are done growing, the farmers will usually just cut the plants. Maybe they'll leave the roots in place. That's where all the nitrogen is kind of bound up in the little root nodules. And then they'll go in and they'll sow their heavy feeding, so high nitrogen needing grains, grasses like corn and wheat in the following season. And then they'll go back to soybeans, which build up the nitrogen to feed the next round of grasses. And then they just kind of rotate between those two crops. Okay. So that same kind of practice or mentality can be used in a more sustainable way on a smaller scale in your home growing spaces. A good crop rotation pattern to get into, and we will start with the fall. Maybe this fall, you're maybe thinking you want to take a little break. You don't want to grow a whole lot in your raised bed, but you still want to keep your soil supported and you want to get those nutrients ready to go for the spring season when you feel like you'll have a little bit more energy. So a great cover crop to sow in the fall would be a crimson clover. Crimson clover is a legume. So as it's growing throughout the fall and throughout the winter, it is going to be creating nitrogen in that soil for you. So you plant your crimson clover fairly densely to help keep away any weed seed that might be getting a little crazy hair and want to get established in your space. You don't want that. So plant your crimson clover nice and densely and allow it to grow throughout the fall, throughout the winter. And then in the spring, you can cut it all back and kind of massage the soil just a little bit. You want to keep those little nodules in there that have all the nitrogen. And then you can sow your leafy greens. So that bed would be fantastic. Like you don't even really have to do anything except for maybe top off the soil a little if you want. But then you could go directly in with your kale, your lettuce, spinach, arugula, Swiss chard. Any of those things will just flourish in a raised bed that was prepped with a legume. Now you could also do a fall round of peas if you want, some like snap peas or English peas. That would have the same effect for you the following spring as if you had clover growing because all of those are nitrogen fixers. It's great to follow a legume with a leafy green or a grain, something that's really going to take hold of that nitrogen and produce more yields for you. Then following something that's a heavy nitrogen feeder, you'll have kind of an excess of other nutrients. So to balance that out, it's good to then follow your leafy greens or your grains with a fruiting plant, right? So like a squash or a tomato or a cucumber or something like that. Something that needs a little bit more phosphorus. You could also do root vegetables here. Something that needs a little bit more phosphorus, maybe a little bit more potassium, not something that's a super heavy nitrogen feeder. You can, of course, plant things that require more nitrogen following your leafy greens. You'll just need to add compost. You'll need to add plant food. There's more soil amendments that need to go in to prepare that space for that round of vegetables. But if you want to kind of use a more natural approach or like less inputs using what's available to you in the soil, crop rotation methods are a great way of kind of leaning into that more natural nutrition cycle versus you having to manage it with organic inputs yourself. I have created a digital downloadable resource guide for you for crop rotation, and I have included the link to that in the show notes. I do charge just a little bit. It's $5 for the guide. And I have some sample like raised bed layouts for the fall season, spring and summer for you to check out, as well as some great like patterns or rotations, additional notes, information on crop rotation just for you. So be sure to check the show notes and, maybe invest the $5 in getting that guide. It's a cup of coffee. I like to keep things fairly reasonable, but I'm just excited to share that information with you. So I hope you check that out. And let's go ahead and wrap up with a heads up for next week and a few other details. Okay, so next week's episode 52, is going to be a big one. It's going to be a big one. I have a special announcement planned for episode 52, and we're going to be talking more about moving with the seasons. So next week will be our last episode in summer, right? And as we welcome this transition to a new season, I just have some top of mind things for each of our 4 seasons, what they kind of invoke in us plant people, right? Us people who like to have our hands in the soil, who like to be connecting with the natural world to some degree, right? And embracing the ecosystem and her rhythms and all of the things. So I've got, some kind of special content planned for next week. And like I said, a big announcement that you'll want to tune in for. And I can't wait to share that information with you then. Now, if you have listened to this podcast in the past, you'll know at the end of every episode, I like to sign off with a fun little fact, fun little tidbit, morsel of information for you. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the pollinator that's featured in this month's calendar page. So if you've been listening to my podcast for a couple months, then maybe you have heard me talk about this delightful little calendar that my partner Marshall got for me around Christmas last year, but it's a 2024 calendar. And every month they have these really wonderful depictions of different pollinators. And then there's a little blurb about the specific pollinator and why they're so cool and so important for our growing spaces. And this month, so September's pollinator, is moths. And I love moths. Moths, just like butterflies, pollinate. They tend to pollinate at nighttime, though. So any of your flowers that like to open up when it's a little cooler or like to open up in the evening will benefit from moth pollination. Moths are just so cool. Ugh, I'm kind of obsessed with lunar moths. Have you ever seen those? Oh my gosh, they're so beautiful. I see videos from time to time pop up on my social media that have like a lunar moth emerging from its chrysalis, and it's just like the coolest thing. They're light green. They're magical. So moths are great. Also, fun fact, bonus for you, you get 2 fun facts. One way that you can tell the difference between a butterfly and a moth is when a butterfly is resting on a flower or a branch or wherever she might be taking a little breather, she rests with her wings up, and moths like to rest with their wings down. So if you see a little moth resting and her wings are laying flat behind her, then it's a moth, not a butterfly. Okay, so there you go. You get 2 fun little facts. To love your moths and how to tell a moth from a butterfly. Okie doke. We'll see you next week for episode 52.
Thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of the Growing Space Podcast. I hope that you learned something new and that you were able to take this new information home with you and implement into your growing journey and into your growing space. As always, I am here to support you and your food growing journey. If you'd like to learn more about the different services and resources and membership programs that I run through the Patio Farmer, please check out my website, thepatiofarmer.com. You can also follow me on social media. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and oh my gosh, most recently, TikTok. Wow. I know. Here I am. Patio Farmer is on TikTok. It's very exciting. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a like or a rating or a review if you want. Maybe share a little comment about your favorite part of the episode. Share it with a friend. The more interactions I get with my little podcast online, the more I'm able to help people just like you in their food growing journeys. As always, thanks for being here, and I will see you again next week.